I stand corrected. Look at that. I saw 167 as the highest. Kind of just twist it. That one was definitely easy. Hey guys, it is Mission Discover and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are going to be testing out some cheap fixed blades. I have 4 fixed blades here, all of which are under $30, and we're going to be seeing if they're really worth your time or if they're just cheap pieces of junk. This all started about 2-ish years ago when I picked up this BPS bushcrafting knife for the grand total of $21. And after putting it through the ringer, I really liked the thing. So I decided to pick up a second cheap fixed blade. I bought this Off-Grid Knives All Day Fixie neck knife for $27, and I liked this one too. With that in mind, I ended up pulling the trigger on 2 more cheap fixed blades, which up until this point, I actually haven't used a ton. With that being said, this video, I'm actually going to put all 4 of these to the test and see what their full capability is. Before we get into the actual testing, I do want to quickly put out a disclaimer. All the knives that I will be showing on today's video and throughout all of my channel are meant to be used as tools for your outdoor pursuits. Always make sure that you use them in a safe manner, have first aid equipment on hand, and if you're young, make sure you get supervision by an adult before you use any bladed tools. But with that being said, we are going to hop right into the testing. Alrighty, so I'm out here in the woods. I've got all 4 fixed blades out in front of me, ready for test number 1. We're going to be testing the sturdiness and durability of these knives by doing some batoning. If you're not familiar, batoning is where you take your knife and you lay it on a piece of wood, you kind of hammer it down through the piece of wood, and you split it into 2 nice pieces like so. It's a technique commonly used in the bushcraft realm and while camping, and although not all of these are made to be bushcrafty camping style knives, I think any full tang knife, meaning it's 1 full piece of metal, should be able to do this without any issues. So we're gonna see if these cheap fixed blades can actually get the job done. Alrighty, for this test, I selected 4 pieces of wood and I cut them all from the same tree to keep some level of consistency in the test, and I made them about 1/3 to 1/2 the width of the blade that we're testing them on. We are going to start with the BPS bushcrafting knife. I have really high expectations for this particular knife because it is a bushcrafting knife designed to do this type of thing, and I've been using this bushcrafting knife for a couple of years and it's been doing really well, so this will be a good baseline for this test. Alright, here we go. With the BPS knife, I'm using a fairly light baton, so this will probably take a couple more hits than it usually does. I stand corrected. 3 hits. That's a nice clean split. And of course the knife is in super good shape. Didn't feel any handle movement or anything of that sort. Yeah, super good baseline for all the other knives to live up to. Next we have the Schrade isolate. This one's kind of listed as like a hunting outdoor style knife. And I bought this knife to just be a good general outdoor knife that was a little bit better at food prep than the Scandi grind on that bushcraft knife. So yet again, this one should do really well in this test. Here we go. That was 5 or 6 hits. Super clean cut again, and the knife felt really good. Moving into the first of our 2 neck knives, we have the Off-Grid Knives All Day Fixie. This one's a flat grind, so it should do pretty well on this, and again, I'm using a smaller piece of wood to kind of maintain that 1/3 to 1/2 of the blade length ratio. Not near as efficient on that split. However, there was a nice kind of harder section throughout the middle of it. I tried to keep it consistent by using the same piece of wood for all of these tests, but you know, that's what you get for using a living tree. And as far as the sturdiness, this thing is 1 solid piece of metal. There isn't a whole lot going on here, and it stands to reason that this would do pretty well in the test, and it did. No movement at all, feels pretty good. And finally, we have the little Ccanku fixed blade. This one is definitely not designed to do this sort of thing, but as I mentioned, this is just to test the sturdiness. So this one should do fine in that aspect of the testing, but I'm not expecting big things of actually how well it splits the wood. All right, let's give it a try. Okay, well this did a little bit better than I thought, and yeah, the sturdiness was fine, didn't feel any handle movement or anything of that sort. All these knives get a pass. Alright, for this next test, I have all 4 knives and some cardboard. We're going to be doing a handle comfort test. I'm going to be push cutting through 2 layers of cardboard with the larger knives, and with the more EDC style smaller knives, I'm going to be doing 1 layer of cardboard. We're going to be doing this for 5 attempts with each knife. and essentially it just has to be fairly comfortable. I don't want to feel any hot spots here. These bigger knives that will be used for more woodscrafty type things, I'm expecting a higher level of success here since I'll actually be using them for that. Whereas these little guys essentially just have to not give me hot spots. I really want the bigger ones to be pretty comfortable. These just kind of have to be adequate. All right, we have a piece of folded over cardboard. We're gonna start with the BPS knife. Here's number 1. We'll do, there's 2, 3, almost hit you guys, 4, 5. Yeah, that felt really, really good. As I've mentioned before in this video, I've been using this knife for a while. Has a really nice contoured ash handle, and I would expect nothing less from this style of knife. All right, moving on to number 2, another folded piece of cardboard, and we have the Schrade isolate here. This one is a fairly slim handle. It's pretty much skeletonized with just a little bit of rubber overmold, so I don't think it's gonna be quite as good as that one, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be pretty comfortable. There's 1. And 2, 3, 4, number 5 coming up. There it is. Yeah, definitely not quite as comfortable for the Schrade isolate, but it did work pretty well. When using my thumb as back support, kind of like this on the jimping, I did feel it a little bit, and that little thinner piece of exposed metal did dig in ever so slightly, but in a Gorilla Grip, this thing is just fine. It was only that little thumb section that I felt. Moving on to our first smaller knife, got the Off-Grid Knives All Day Fixie. This is single layer cardboard because these are a little bit smaller and I'm not asking them to do as demanding of tasks. Two, 3, 4, 5. Even though this was skeletonized, it felt really, really good. Not pushing into my hand anywhere. And it didn't even have the same issue that the Schrade did. As I mentioned, that little metal tang on the back was pushing in. Well, this whole thing is just a metal tang and I didn't really feel anything. Super nice and comfortable. And our last knife for the comfort test, we got the little Ccanku EDC fixed blade. This one does have a really weird blade shape and it's kind of small to be able to do this. So we'll see how it goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, not really any issues with this one. This one was actually surprisingly comfortable to me. Even though it's little, I can get a full 4-finger grip on it, as you can see there. And there's not a whole lot of space between the tang and the actual scales, meaning I didn't really feel the tang at all. It kind of just felt like one solid piece. As you can see, it's almost flush there, and I think that bodes really well for it. Yeah, this one did really, really well. Alrighty, I got all 4 of our knives, and we're going to be doing the Sheath Security Test. First, we have our 2 larger knives. Because these are belt knives, and they're going to be oriented with gravity aiding the security of the sheath, I'm not really gonna have super high expectations of these. Essentially, all I want to be able to do is turn it over and shake it a little bit and it to stay in. So this one gets a pass. And so does this one. With our neck knives, however, I'm asking a little bit more. I don't just want to be able to shake it, since it's going to be hanging from my neck like so. I also want to be able to lift it up above the string till the string is fully stretched out and drop it and have it stay in. So that one's good. And that one is too. In the spirit of full disclosure, on this Ccanku fixed blade, I did do a little bit of sheath modification before this video. However, the sheath modification that I did was not to make the actual knife retention any stronger. It's about the same as far as the actual pulling force that it takes to get the knife out of the sheath. All I did was ensure that there was less rattle in the sheath, because occasionally the knife would kind of push one way or another and bend the sheath a little bit, which would then make it a lot easier to pull out. So it wasn't actually the direct pulling force that I was concerned with, but the amount that the knife could move up and down in the sheath. With that being said, I don't think that would be of concern if you do end up picking up this knife. And even if you are concerned, using a heat gun, it's pretty easy to make the sheath a little bit softer and just make sure that it's fully secured laterally in the sheath. So all of these knives pass the Sheath Security test. Alrighty, moving into our last test that will actually be including all 4 of our knives, we are going to be testing edge retention. Now, what I'm actually testing by doing this edge retention test isn't actually the steel, it's how well the steel is heat treated. If you're not familiar, heat treatment has an impact on numerous factors such as corrosion resistance, toughness, and edge retention. Out of all of those different factors, I think that edge retention is going to be the easiest for me to test, so that's what we're going to try and do. The basic idea here is that I'm going to test how much force it takes to cut through something, and then through a controlled process, we're going to dull all of the knives and then see how much sharpness they lost. I'm also going to be including a baseline knife. That will be my Kaiser Original in 154 cm. I already know that the steel on that Kaiser Original is heat treated well, and 154 cm provides a good baseline because it should perform better than all of the steels on these cheaper knives, but still be a decent reference point for them. So with the general overview out of the way, let's go test these edges. We're going to start our initial testing using the Kaiser Original. I'm going to be using the tip section kind of right about here on all of these knives, and we're going to be pushing down slow and consistently, and we're going to be recording the highest number that I see on the scale. The highest number I saw was 158. Here's the BPS knife. Highest number I saw was 123. Here is the off-grid knives. I saw 167 as the highest. And here is the Ccanku. I saw 147 or 148, we'll call it, as the highest. Alrighty, now it's time to dull these blades. I have a piece of sandpaper taped to my vise here. I'm going to put a 2.5 pound weight on top of our blade, and we're going to run it back and forth 10 times. Here's the Kaiser Original. Here's the BPS knife. The Schrade. The off-grid knives. And the Ccanku. Starting with the Kaiser Original, we're going to retest all the blades and see how much sharpness they lost. I saw 173.5, so we'll round it up to 174 as the highest number for this one. Here's the BPS knife. I saw 167. Here's the Schrade. I saw 238. Here's the off-grid knives. I saw 185, and finally here is the Ccanku. I saw 203 somewhere in there. I think that was the highest. It was somewhere in the low 200s. Now, after I do some calculations, I'll talk to you guys about the results. So here are the results from the edge retention test. I have some more accurate numbers. Some of the numbers that I said in the initial recording were slightly off from what it actually was, so I reviewed the footage and made sure I got some pretty accurate numbers here. And then on the far right side, I have the calculated percentage of sharpness retained. So at the top is the Kaiser Original with 90.8% sharpness retained. I was just using that one as a baseline to be able to see how all the other ones did in comparison. Essentially what I'm looking for a pass from all of these knives is to generally be where they should be in reference to the Kaiser Original's sharpness percentage retained. I know there's a couple of different variables that may change things, such as the angle behind the edge, but generally everything did fall in line as to where it should be if the steel is heat treated properly. The off-grid knives in D2 did second best, and that is how it should go. The Schrade should then be next, and it is. The Ccanku should actually be next, and then the BPS, but because of how thick the BPS is behind the edge, I think it retained a little bit of that sharpness better. But generally everything lined up how it should, therefore I can conclude that everything is heat treated adequately. So all of these knives do get a pass. Now we're going to move into the more niche style tests with each of these knives, starting with the BPS bushcrafting knife. Like many knives in the bushcrafting field, this one has a 90-degree spine on it, which allows it to do a lot of different scraping tasks, as well as strike a fire steel. Speaking of fire steels, that's what we're going to be testing. I have mine here, and we're going to see how well it does in comparison to the actual striker that comes with the fire steel. Alrighty, so I have a piece of aluminum foil here, just to make sure I don't catch anything on fire that I don't want to be on fire. And we're going to start by doing 3 attempts with the actual fire steel striker to see how easy it is to do and to see how much sparks we actually get off of it. Here's attempt number 1. Here's number 2. Here's number 3. Yeah, so it was pretty easy, not super comfortable because of how you had to hold this thin little piece of metal. But yeah, the actual sparks that you got off of it was definitely a lot. Now time to test it using the back of the knife. Here's 1. Here's 2, and here's number 3. I definitely don't think I had quite as many sparks while using the back of the knife, but it was definitely a lot more comfortable. With that being said, I think this is definitely adequate to get the job done, and it's sharpened up well enough to where you could definitely do some scraping tasks with it, so I'd say this gets a pass. For this next test, we are going to be testing the Woodscraft carving potential of both of our larger knives. I have some dowels here, and we are going to be testing how deep of a cut it can make, as well as how thin of a cut it can make. Essentially what I'm looking for here is for a significant difference between the deep cut and the shallow cut, because I need a good carving knife to be able to do both. What I'm classifying as a significant margin is that I want the deep cut to be at least 10 times thicker than the shallow cut. That may sound like a lot, but with how shallow of cuts you can make here, I think you guys will be a little bit surprised. Starting with the BPS bushcrafting knife, I'm actually going to be doing this standing up so that on the deep cuts I have enough follow through so that I'm not hitting anything with the knife. Here's our deep cut. This measures in at its thickest portion at right around 1/8 of an inch. And now time for a thin cut. And this one's essentially paper thin. I'm not going to deal with measuring this. This one obviously gets a pass. That is at least 20 times thicker than this. Here's our deep cut with the Schrade isolate. And this one measures in at just over 1/16 of an inch. Now time for our shallow cut. Similar story, this is paper thin. It's probably not quite as big of a difference as with the Bushcraft knife, but our larger cut is definitely at least 10 times larger than this one is. This test went pretty much as expected. Both of them passed pretty easily. The Bushcraft knife did phenomenal, and the flat grind knife did pretty decent. The flat grind knife isn't specifically designed to do Woodscraft, it just can kind of flex into that because of how versatile it is. But these are definitely both adequate to do carving tasks with. In this test, we're going to be looking at the slicing profile and ability of 2 of our knives by doing some food prep on some of the largest doggone strawberries known to man. Seriously, is that actually a strawberry? What the heck is that? First up, we have the Schrade isolate. As I mentioned, this is kind of an outdoorsy hunting style knife that I got specifically to kind of be a do-it-all knife. It's able to do the Woodscraft stuff, but it should also be able to do the food prep stuff. So we're going to see how this does. First of all, any knife should be able to do this. Just kind of cut it there. That works just fine. You're going to see how thin of a slice we can get here. That's pretty good. Look at that. Let's try it again. Oh, that one's pretty good. Ooh, look at that one. Yeah, man. Yeah, this seems to be doing pretty well. Just chop it down the middle. Yeah, just do a little slice and dice action. Make sure you keep your fingers in a safe position. Yeah, that works pretty good. And the strawberry is good too. Knife number 2 we're going to be testing is the off-grid knives All Day Fixie. It is also a flat ground knife and should do pretty well at tasks like this. Let's cut into the big mama with this one. It's got a little blade. It's about the same width as the strawberry, but cuts through just fine. Let's see how thin of a slice we can get here. Pretty good, pretty good. Look at that. Do one more. That one might be even better. Look at that. Yeah, pretty good. Little slice and dice test. Yeah. Works just fine. Moving into another one of our niche tests, we're going to be looking at our EDC fixed blades and how well they can do draw cutting. Draw cutting is essentially where you use the tip to kind of trace something out or make a cut across something, and you need to be able to precisely follow a line or kind of cut in a specific area. And smaller knives like this are especially good at it because you can get your whole hand around it and have really good control because of how small and palmable the knife is. For this testing, essentially, I'm going to draw a triangle with a fine tip Sharpie like that, and we're just gonna cut it out and see how clean of a cut is and how close to the line we are. And as a baseline to see how good these knives really are, we're going to be comparing it to one of these little craft knives, which is pretty much designed to do this sort of thing. So I'm gonna label all of these so I know which one's which. Let's get started. So upon popping these out, what I'm seeing is honestly a pretty good performance from both of them. The Ccanku knife definitely did a really good job of being able to stay on the line because of how tip heavy it is. It's almost shaped like a utility knife blade, which made it really easy to kind of maneuver. However, it did have a little bit more tear out than the off-grid knives did, and vice versa. The off-grid knives had a really clean cut but wasn't as easy to stay on the line. And then in comparison, the craft knife did well at both of them. I'm having some pictures roll up on the screen now to kind of show you a more up-close view of each of them so you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I would definitely classify both of these knives as having a pass in this test. Both of them would definitely get the job done if needed. Alrighty, for our final test of the day, we are going to be looking at the Ccanku EDC fixed blade. And as I mentioned in the previous test, this one has a very utility knife-esque style blade shape. And one of the things that utility knives are really good at doing is popping up zip ties. Why it's so good is because it's thin enough at the tip to be able to get under there, and then you can kind of just twist and pop them. So I wanted to see how well this was at doing the same sort of thing. So with that being said, I put 2 zip ties of 2 different sizes around my handle of my hammer, and we're gonna see if I can pop both of these off with relative ease. Starting with the little guy, I essentially just have to work the tip under, which was not too hard to get under there, and then kind of just twist it and it should pop off. That one was definitely easy, probably actually easier than a utility knife, which is saying something. And then this one might have a little bit harder time because it has to be able to not only get under there, which we just got, but also has to be able to stay under there enough to pop the whole zip tie, which yeah, it's definitely struggling, but got it. I definitely think it's not quite overall as good as a utility knife blade, but this does really, really well for this style of thing. This blade shape is definitely really well suited to do this, and I didn't have any issues doing it. All the handle holding during it was comfortable, and I didn't feel like I was going to slip and lose the knife. I also didn't feel like the knife was going to break out at the tip when I was trying to kind of wrench it in there. did really well. Definitely get to pass on this test. Alrighty, so with all of our testing for the video done, I'm just going to give my overall thoughts and opinions on the value of each of these knives individually, kind of look at the overall quality and fit and finish, and then just give you a general closing remark as to my opinions on cheap knives and whether or not they're worth it. Starting with the BPS bushcrafting knife, as I've mentioned several times throughout this video, I have had this one longer than any of these knives for over 2 years now, and the thing has been holding up phenomenally. I think this is an amazing value as far as a bushcraft knife. It's just a simple carbon steel, comfortable handle, really good fit and finish. It comes with a really nice mirror polish when you get it. Obviously mine has seen some wear and tear and is no longer a mirror polish, and the handle has definitely seen better days as far as its cleanliness, but it's been through a lot and has done everything phenomenally. It comes super sharp out of the box. The leather sheath is awesome, really well put together, and is holding up well. And as far as the value of this knife, it's somewhere around that $20 mark. This thing's fantastic. Would definitely say that this particular cheap knife is worth the buy. Moving in to the Schrade isolate, this one also performed really well in all of our tests. And although I haven't used this one much, after doing all of these tests, I'm fairly confident that this one will be a really good staple in my arsenal for years to come. The sheath is really well thought out, has lots of nice attachment points, as well as a belt clip on the back. Solid retention, has a little sharpener built into the sheath. Although I typically end up sharpening my knives on a flat stone, it's good to have that option. And the overall knife is fairly comfortable. Good blade shape, feels good in the hand, and is capable of doing all the things that I bought it to do. At $18, would definitely say this one is worth buying. Looking at our off-grid knives, All Day Fixie, yet again, I'll just say it right out front, definitely worth buying. The knife is really well put together, really well thought out. It's just one solid piece of metal, but the metal is heat treated well, does its job, super nice coating on it, even though it's skeletonized, feels really good. That sheath is super secure, really nice big holes, well thought out. They even provide you extra attachments in the box and some really nice paracord to make a neck lanyard, which is really nice. Overall, this one is of great value. They really thought out this design, and definitely I think is worth a buy. It's probably 27 bucks-ish for the black version, and I think for the plain steel version, it's probably 25-ish. So definitely not expensive, and definitely is worth a buy in my opinion. And finally, the Ccanku knife. This is the only one out of the bunch that I would have some hesitation to recommend. I think that the knife passed all of our tests pretty well. It's definitely an adequate knife, but this really cheap kind of unknown brand knife territory can kind of get a little bit sketchy. This particular one ended up working out, but I know there's a lot of other knives on there that some of them are just hit or miss. However, given the price tag of a lot of these knives that are kind of more no-name brands, I think it's definitely worth a gamble. Kind of try a couple and find one that you like. I think you can probably find a hidden diamond in the rough, searching through kind of some of these lesser known knife brands in the cheap category. This knife was only 12 bucks, and it works pretty well. Obviously, it's a little bit more rough around the edges than the other ones. As I mentioned, the sheath, I kind of wanted to mod it a little bit because it had a little bit of rattle, and in some cases that could make it so that the knife was a little bit easier to get out. Not something I'm super concerned about. I wasn't really concerned about it falling out, but I did want to address that. And when you look at the sheath, you can definitely tell there wasn't as much thought put into it, and the grind at the heel of the blade here is not super great. But yet again, for 11 bucks, this thing is definitely worth buying. And although it may be hit or miss, I think other knives in this super cheap kind of sub $13, $14 category, there could be some other good ones out there. You just might have to do a little bit of searching. So overall, my thoughts on cheap fixed blades as a whole is that, yeah, I think they're decent in that kind of $15 to $25, $30 range. If you're buying from a reputable brand, it'll probably be pretty decent. There's some that are better than others. Through how much refinement in certain companies we've had over the years, as well as different steel technologies and sheath manufacturing technologies that have kind of trickled down, I think some of this cheap stuff nowadays is really good. And through some searching, you may even be able to find a super cheap knife that works out pretty well for you, kind of like this Ccanku. So with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video and possibly learned something from it, and maybe you'll take a new approach in your fixed blade buying in the future. If you did end up enjoying this video, possibly think about hitting that like button and maybe even subscribing if you haven't, because I have lots more informational and educational content centered around the outdoors coming real soon. I really appreciate you guys watching today. Thanks for coming in, and I will see you next time. God bless.